Joe, I think you're freezing up there a little bit. Do we still got you? Joe. All right, Joe, one last question.
Yes.
We talked to you last week for a print article about the possible criminal activity of someone who leaked to the New York Times the president's tax returns. Real quick, do you think that we will bring this person, will this person be criminally prosecuted?
It's going to be tough. You have to do this right away when it happens. Now, for all we know, there may very well be a grand jury looking into the accountants, the accounting firms, the lawyers, the law firms that represented the president, as well as employees of the IRS and the Treasury Department. I hope there is an investigation. I hope there is a grand jury. One should be begun immediately, and someone who did this should be indicted.
All right, Joe Giordanovo, we appreciate it. Now you stick around here. We're going to talk more about COVID. We've got a doctor, an expert to give you the latest. Stick around.
Wake up every morning with just the news. All the news and none of the noise.
And welcome back to Just the News AM. I am Carrie Sheffield. We're going to give you all the latest on the president and his health. We've got a doctor who's an expert on this issue, Mr. Jesse Pelletier, on the line with us. Jesse, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me on this morning.
And I should mention you are the founder of Halidine Inc. for our viewers. So Jesse, I know that you have created a nasal spray, which is directly for treating COVID. What is your assessment? Obviously, you're not in the room there, but as an outside observer and doctor and expert on these issues, what can you say about the president's health at this point? We've heard different things, that it was very serious early on, but then we were told it maybe wasn't as serious. Do you think the president could actually be released today?
So these are great questions. I think there continues to be some mixed messaging from his medical team at Walter Reed. But despite this, there are certain facts that we can glean, and we're informed from some of the tests he's had and also some of the treatments he's been given. Now, one of the things we understand in COVID is we've all kind of heard about this 80-20 rule, where 80% of patients might suffer a very mild course or even be asymptomatic. He's unfortunately in the latter, the 20%, which seems to be moderate COVID to severe COVID to even critical COVID. And again, that's informed by some of the findings we've had that have been reported by his staff, which include a decreased pulse oximetry. They might include some pneumonitis or changes in the lung, but that's it's been very difficult to garner accurate information there. And also, we're informed by the therapies he's had, including his antiviral remdesivir, his polyclonal antibody as well from Regeneron, and the dexamethasone. These speak to treating two different phases of the virus. We know that often early on, a lot of COVID patients will suffer setbacks just from the viral infection itself. But around day 8 to 10, post-symptomatically, this immune system can kind of kick in and cause some more disease. And really finding the timing, that perfect timing, is still an art, when the immune system kicks in and when we have to be less concerned about the virus. And we saw that the president was treated for that immune system, those immune system issues with the dexamethasone.
Sure, and talk a little bit more about this experimental drug. We know that he's been treated with a drug that has not technically been approved by FDA, but it is experimental at this point. And this president is, as they call him, the right to try president, where he signed executive order or legislation to allow patients who maybe want to have access to something that isn't fully approved, they get the right to try. What do we know about this?
Yeah, so it's the polyclonal antibody, which is, as you said, Regeneron had just recently completed a phase 1 study in about 270 plus patients. They're completing further phase trials, and honestly, it looks very promising. It's decreased symptoms in those patients, and it's decreased viral loads as well. And through compassionate care, there are a few times, that these can be allowed through, and certainly for such a high-profile individual as the president, we can imagine that would be the case. As far as, other patients who might be kind of questioning this or wondering if they could have a similar type of care or treatment, there are convalescent serum, which is not terribly unlike this. However, I do believe the polyclonal antibody to be a little superior. So it's a very promising medicine. It's just very early in its stage and not ready to be released for the public.
And the fact that it was experimental and that the president was taking this, he touched on it in a video that he released while he is still there at the hospital. He talked about some of these more experimental drugs and said that he was under excellent care and that he was glad to see that these treatments had been available for him. What do we know about the mortality rate? Because it seems that even though we are still seeing new cases of diagnosis of COVID, the fatality rate has been going down. Does this mean that we are better at treating this?
Yeah, it certainly does. And that's something I think that we're all very grateful for, especially as cases become ascendant through Europe and the United States. There are different therapies that we have available now that can be used at different stages, understanding both the infectious and inflammatory components, and also just understanding better how to aerate and treat the lung. That can include utilizing the ventilator with less frequency, using prone positioning, using CPAP and BiPAP and mechanisms like this that we were a little bit more cautious of early on. We're seeing much better results in mortality. So that's very, very encouraging, especially as, again, we're heading into a season when it appears that the COVID is going to be ascendant throughout the fall and winter.
Well, and you mentioned prone positioning. We've been told by the doctor of Sean Connolly, the president's physician, that the president had mentioned prone positioning, that he was aware of that as a possible treatment, but the doctors or the team in consultation with the president, they chose not to utilize that. That was something that was a tool that was not used, at least from what we know right now. Real quick, what is your read on a vaccine? What's the timeline? What do you think is the time that we'll get a vaccine? First, for the people who are perhaps on the front lines or also more vulnerable, nursing homes. We were told also by the Trump White House that minority communities would be specifically high on the list because there is a much higher comorbidity prevalence there in these communities. What's your read on a vaccine availability for these groups and then also the general population?
Yeah, I think that's you nailed it. A vaccine is going to be a vital part of the tapestry or a layered ability to treat this pandemic. Fortunately, we have 4 vaccines now that are in phase 3 testing, and that they're enrolling anywhere between 30 and 65,000 patients. So the information should be on efficacy and safety should be robust, and a lot of importance is going to be around the positioning of those vaccines and how the public accepts them. So getting the right message out is going to be very important. All that being said, I think that vaccines will probably be available, I would say, in about 2 months towards the end of the year for frontline workers and for other patients who have significant comorbidities, the elderly, nursing homes, things like that. But to really ramp up the vaccination process, it's going to be well into next year. So, this is not we're not sprinting to the end here. People need to understand that this is a bit of a marathon, and that, we're going to need to rely on our important infection control mechanisms, despite the commencement of the vaccine. And also, we need to remember that it's not the vaccine that saves lives, it's vaccinations that save lives.
Well, and to
so
that
we have
point,
to get
Doctor,
that right
I want to get
forward.
your take, because we have seen from some folks who are skeptical, maybe politically, they don't like the president. They have said that if a vaccine is approved under his watch, they might be more cautious or reluctant to take this vaccine. What's your response to that?
Yeah, it's kind of how I had just stated that these vaccines are undergoing very robust studies. I mean, you look at something like Operation Warp Speed, and that really helped in getting the manufacturing component and the logistics component. But the science around the safety of the vaccine is going to be pretty well studied at that point. It's also going to be assessed by multiple independent, investigative sources. And so I would feel very comfortable about the safety. Now, whether it's released as an EUA or something else called a BLA, which is a more routine way to permit this therapy to come through to the public, there might be some political positioning around there. But I would have no qualms about the safety of these vaccines when they're made available.
And real quick, when we're talking about is there a big difference between COVID-associated versus COVID-caused deaths? Real quick.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that question.
COVID-associated versus COVID-caused death. Is there a big difference?
Well, it can be difficult. Remember, a lot of patients experiencing morbidity and mortality are very sick otherwise, and parsing through.
Doctor, we're going to leave it right there.
Okay.
We'll have you back to discuss this more. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you. Bye.
Wake up every morning with just the news. All the news and none of the noise.
Hey there, welcome back to Just the News AM. I am Carrie Sheffield. Well, in case you didn't notice, we have an election that is still going on against this backdrop of all the chaos of the president currently in the hospital. We're going to break down the politics of all of this, and I've got Amanda Iovina. She's a Republican strategist with me to help us. Amanda?
Hi, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for joining us. So, Amanda, we know that the coronavirus is something that the Trump campaign had not focused as much attention on. They were looking more at issues like the economic recovery, about foreign policy in China in particular, things like this. What does this do to the Trump campaign in terms of bringing coronavirus back to front and center?
Well, I think it's always been a top issue among a certain segment of voters, and the campaign has been trying to speak to them and talking to what the administration has done on COVID and what they've been doing for the past couple of months. And I think this is able to highlight what the administration has been doing, and the president can now talk about it in more of a firsthand way, which I think will help empathize his speeches and his tone towards the Americans that have been affected personally by the virus.
Yeah, and I guess toward that end, I have a piece on our website on justthenews.com looking at this question of whether the president could be actually humanized by being struck with this illness, and whether possibly it could help him maybe among suburban voters, maybe among women. Do you think that's the case?
I think it could be. I mean, you saw kind of his motorcade, his push out. A lot of his videos this weekend were trying to express a sense of strength, which definitely appeals to his base. But I think just seeing him in more of a human condition is going to be helpful. It makes kind of suburban women, like you said, seem like they will know him a little bit better. It's a little bit more relatable.
And when it comes to the treatments, we just mentioned in the previous block with the physician, the president is undergoing an experimental treatment, and he's also talked about, how he is seeing firsthand what it's like to be a patient of coronavirus. What about on the Democratic side? We saw House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, for example, said that the president was basically playing with fire, and that in some respects he's sick because he wasn't taking enough precautions. What would this mean? What are you seeing among voters, or is it too early to tell within polls? Which side of the fence do these independent voters seem to be on? Are they more on the Pelosi side, that Trump should have done more, versus Trump is doing all he can and he was out front and center and that's why he got sick, because he's really trying to protect us and he's even putting his own life on the line?
It's a little too early to tell from the polls. But in the same respect that those independent voters would want to see a little bit of empathy, more so from the president than they've potentially been seeing over the last couple of months, they're going to want to see some empathy from Democrats as well. The hard line of some Democrats cheering the president's illness is not going to sit well with those independent voters.
And in terms of the debate performance, one other thing that I looked at in my piece was you had a very aggressive Trump who was coming out at the gate, I think probably to, in his opinion, take Biden aback and maybe put him on his heels. And Biden certainly did seem to hold his own. Do you think that if the debates do occur as on the timeline, and Biden has said he does want to continue if Trump is well, October 15th is the next presidential debate, do you think Trump might take a different tack?
It's a little too early to say. We'll see if he gets better and is well enough to do it, and if they can put the safety precautions in for the next debate. But, I think that the president kind of, like you said, put Biden back on his heels a bit. And it really depends on how he comes out of this illness, if he can, again, use that empathy, use the relatability to reach out to those independent voters in the next debate.
And we know that there's a vice presidential debate on Wednesday of this week. What should we be looking for first, just in terms of the dynamic? What do you think we'll see between Harris and the Vice President Pence? Is it going to be as contentious as last week's debate? And then how does the coronavirus affect all of this?
I would think it would be a little bit less contentious than the presidential debate. I would hope so. But also the vice president he's been on the coronavirus task force. I think he can speak very intelligently about all that the administration has been doing and is going to be doing to combat the virus. And then Harris obviously represents a little bit more of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And it'll be interesting to see where she splits from Biden and tries to pull him a little bit further to the left.
And your polling firm works with a number of clients. Walk us through, what are you working on? What are you seeing in swing districts or even some of your clients?
Well, with the so many states doing early voting right now, it's just trying to reach those voters that are still undecided and have their ballots in hand, and trying to really put the pedal to the floor to make sure that the campaigns are reaching the right voters at the right moment, to bring them back onto our side. It's really about individual targeting at this stage of the game.
And what kind of targeting are the candidates doing? What are you seeing are kind of the most effective tactics?
Most of our candidates are using predictive modeling, our predictive analytics, and really talking to the individual voters, whether it's on digital, in the mail, even OTT, targeting the specific messages that we've kind of been preparing for all cycle and executing on the final plans here at the end.
And what are you seeing in terms of your candidates and their possible legal defenses? Because we're already seeing lots of lawsuits playing out across the country, whether it's in Maine or Iowa or Nevada. Are your candidates lawyering up right now?
My candidates are not, but the state parties have a decent staff of lawyers on hand, and they'll be helping out all the candidates up and down the ballot.
Do you think that we'll have clear winners on election night?
Depends on the state, but we'll see. Some states that aren't legally allowed to start counting ballots until election night, until polls are closed, those are going to be a little bit longer of a wait for election results than the states that can start counting right away.
And in terms of, you mentioned that many millions of people who have already cast their votes in the mail, they've done early voting. What's your sense among these voters? Are there any sort of exit polls for these folks?
There aren't, but from our analytics, these tend to be kind of the regular Democratic voters that the Democratic Party turns out on election day. They're just voting a little bit earlier, whether it's because of convenience or fear of COVID. This is kind of the Democratic Party is kind of stringing out their get out the vote efforts, whereas a lot of Republicans are going to be waiting closer to election day to turn out.
And in terms of Trump voters, we have seen various voices out there in some polling firms say what they are describing as anonymous Trump voters or hidden Trump voters, that there is, especially when it comes to a live poller versus a machine poller, a lot of Trump supporters are not willing to even disclose that they are going to support or vote for the president. Are you seeing that in your polling?
We're not seeing a lot of it. I would caution against kind of taking a lot of those polls very seriously. But an interesting question to look at from some pollsters are doing is, who do you think is going to win? Instead of who are you voting for, who are your neighbors going to vote for? And that's a question that can kind of get at to see if there is that shy Trump vote or not. Kind of get people's sense on the ground from what their neighbors are thinking and what they think their friends are going to be doing.
And are you seeing that? Are people saying their neighbors are going to vote more for Trump?
I'm not seeing any too much difference at the moment, but we'll see in the next couple of weeks. I think once kind of the debate bump declines, that those numbers will pick up a bit.
All right, Amanda Iovino, we appreciate it, Republican strategist. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks. And I want to let you folks know, related to this topic, on our website, justthenews.com, we looked at latest Gallup polling that found there was actually a majority of Americans who think that Trump is going to win. There's a gap between people who say they will vote for Trump. So among those voters, it was about 52%, but 59% of people say that Trump is going to win at the end of the day. So there's a gap there. We are going to give you the latest on President Trump's condition. Stay tuned.
Wake up every morning with just the news. All the news and none of the noise.
And welcome back to Just the News AM. I am Carrie Sheffield. We are going to look at the politics of President Trump coming down with the coronavirus. Now, on our website, on justthenews.com, I have my latest article there, and I put the question out there, do you think that possibly this could actually help the president by helping empathize him, create him, or humanize him with voters, in particular swing voters, in particular women, suburban women, folks who say they might like some of the president's policies, but they find his style to be a bit too aggressive. Obviously, the president came out of the gate very much swinging during the debate, and a lot of independent voters said they were turned off by how aggressive he was. So the question now, when you look at his demeanor, I've got some tape here. I want you to take a look. His demeanor seemed a bit more calm, subdued. Let's take a look at the first one.
I want to thank everybody for the tremendous support. I'm going to Walter Reed Hospital. I think I'm doing very well, but we're going to make sure that things work out. The First Lady is doing very well. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I will never forget it. Thank you.
And that was the president right before he was about to board on a helicopter for Walter Reed Hospital. And as you can see, he certainly seems calm. There were body language experts over the weekend who said that he seemed humbled. Let's throw the next one also. The latest development as the president got to Walter Reed. Let's take a watch of that.
We're getting great reports from the doctors. This is an incredible hospital, Walter Reed. The work they do is just absolutely amazing, and I want to thank them all. The nurses, the doctors, everybody here. I've also gotten to meet some of the soldiers and the first responders, and what a group. I also think we're going to pay a little surprise to some of the great patriots that we have out on the street. And they've been out there for a long time, and they've got Trump flags, and they love our country. So I'm not telling anybody but you, but I'm about to make a little surprise visit. So perhaps I'll get there before you get to see me. But I just, when I look at the enthusiasm, and we have enthusiasm like probably nobody's ever had. Our people that love the job we're doing, we have more enthusiasm than maybe anybody. So it's been a very interesting journey. I learned a lot about COVID. I learned it by really going to school. This is the real school. This isn't the let's read the book school. And I get it, and I understand it, and it's a very interesting thing, and I'm going to be letting you know about it. In the meantime, we love the USA, and we love what's happening. Thank you.
And that's the president there on Sunday, as you can see, putting up a very positive demeanor there. And we've also got, as he mentioned, he went out to give some support to the supporters who came out waving Trump flags to wish good health and recovery to the president. I think we've got that video as well. So there you see the president. He's got his motorcade. He's waving there. You've got the cutout, the giant cutout of the president. You've got the flags there. Now, what's interesting about this is that the president was pre-cleared by his medical advisors to leave the hospital. There has been some criticism by some folks in the media and on the left to say that the president was endangering people, endangering the staff, endangering the Secret Service officers who took him there to outside of Walter Reed there. And obviously the president, his team pushing back and saying, no, he was pre-cleared. He had every right medically to be there. And just overall, just seeing how the president very much has been able to put a positive spin on his condition here. It'll be really interesting to see how this turns out in terms of the debate and whether his demeanor will change. He was certainly very aggressive against Joe Biden, and he certainly seems more subdued. Now, we do know that the Trump campaign has issued multiple statements calling on the Joe Biden campaign to take down its negative ads while the president is in the hospital and on the mend. And the Trump campaign has issued multiple statements saying that the Biden campaign has promised that they would take down these negative ads, and yet they apparently are still there. Now, again, we leave it to you, our viewers, to decide who's telling the truth here. But the Trump campaign says they have documented radio ads, they've documented television ads, still continuing to go after the president in a very negative way, even as he's been battling for his health. And apparently on Friday, things were pretty serious with his health. And so, again, the dynamic will be interesting to see if the president is going to continue his very aggressive, combative demeanor against Joe Biden, or whether he's going to try to take a different tack. When you see what he said in his video on Saturday, he said there was an outpouring of bipartisan support for him, and he said that he would, quote, never forget it. He said that he saw the spirit of the American people rallying behind him, that there was a lot of well wishes for him, regardless of party, and that he was really gratified to see that. So we'll see if that tone, this bipartisan Trump who was broadcasting out of Walter Reed, whether that's the man who's going to show up on the debate stage if he indeed does make it on October 15th. And certainly the president, again, when he issued his very positive video about the outpouring of support on Saturday, one thing, as I noted in my article on justthenews.com, was that this is something that, whether it's women or independents or folks who are on the fence, the president is trying to speak to them. And this is something also in my piece that Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City, touched on. He spoke to my colleague Steve Bannon here on Real America's Voice. And he said that for a lot of folks, and he said, for you who are on the fence about this president, take a look at his heart and look what he's done, because he put his own life on the line to get a vaccine, to get the PPE for the first responders. And the president himself said, I could have stayed locked up in my ivory tower there on the second floor of the White House. I could have removed myself from everything. I could have not been in the front of the fray, but instead I chose to put myself on the line. And he said that's what a leader does. That's really what being the White House occupant is all about. And Giuliani said this was very much in contrast with Joe Biden, who has been in his basement. He said a world leader should not be in his basement. All right, stay tuned. We are going to keep delving into this with Carter Page.
Wake up every morning with just the news. All the news and none of the noise.
And welcome back to Just the News AM. I'm Carrie Sheffield. Now, we want to make sure that in the loss of the shuffle here of the 2020 election campaign and coronavirus, that a very enormous story is not dropped. There is so much to unpack here about FBI abuse and the story of Carter Page. Joining me here on the phone is Mr. Carter Page himself.
Good morning, Carrie. Great to be with you.
Hi. So Carter, now I want folks first to know that you've got a book out telling your full side of the story. I think we've got the book cover. We'll put it up right there. But basically, your book is called Abuse and Power: How an Innocent American Was Framed in an Attempted Coup Against the President. We are hearing revelation after revelation. We just had a new revelation last week where the intelligence community declassified a report showing that there is evidence that the Hillary Clinton campaign basically cooked up this narrative of collusion. Were you surprised by this declassification? We just had Joe DiGenova earlier saying this should have been released years ago.
Yeah, absolutely, Carrie. And I dig into this in my book. These are things on so many levels that I knew about from the very beginning because I've lived at the center of this. And unfortunately, so much has happened. And I think, in terms of this most recent revelation, one of the, relevant quotes is they're talking about all these things that are happening in July 2016. And unfortunately, I tried informing both the FBI in a letter to James Comey, but also a human rights appeal. When this election interference happened in the last presidential election by the Democrats, I sent a letter to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe to inform them of this severe election interference campaign being perpetrated by the coalition between the Democrats and the Obama-Biden administration. So it's been a long time, and I know some members of Congress and people within DOJ have been fighting for the truth, but I think we have still exactly along the lines of what you're saying, Carrie.
So Carter, I want to put up a tweet that you recently put out. It seemed last week that James Comey had quite a case of amnesia. I think, can we put his tweet up there where you stated, having interacted with members of the U.S. intelligence community, including the FBI and CIA for many decades, you wrote a letter to James Comey on September 25th, 2016, letting him know about your case. It seemed there were many bombshell revelations that James Comey just didn't seem to understand, or at least, that he didn't seem to remember. Why do you think that was the case?
Well, I think that letter, that is proof that I did inform him. He was asked right before about whether he knew I was working with the CIA, and which is a big controversy, and it's been in terms of the Durham investigation, it was the first charge that was brought and the first guilty plea that has been brought against one FBI attorney who I was working with, who I was in communications with, and unfortunately, there's a lot more, and there are a lot more people involved. If you read the charging document.
So Carter, do you think we're going to see more indictments?
Yeah. I think we should. We certainly should. And there are a lot of hints and clues, and I knew there's obviously a lot of people involved. And
so who do you think we might expect in terms of an indictment?
Well, I don't like to speculate, and I like to have my full facts. Unfortunately, it's been a big challenge for everyone because we don't have the full facts. There are a lot of serious clues that are building up. And as we continue to get more information, like we just received from the Director of National Intelligence, but these things need to be resolved, and it's growing urgent because we're just 4 weeks away.
Now, we just reported on our website on justthenews.com that Andrew McCabe has said he will not testify due to concerns about the coronavirus. Do you think there's something there that he's trying to hide? I mean, his attorneys say that he's willing to testify in the future once the pandemic has died down, and they say that because of the complexity of the case, he does not want to do this remotely. What's your response to that?
I think it's another example, Carrie, of the complete double standards. So many Trump supporters, including myself, were dragged in front of not only the U.S. Senate, which is what's in question here, but the House and also the Mueller witch hunt. So we've all been dragged through this. And unfortunately, the thing that's really frustrating about this is they have subpoena power. The Senate Judiciary Committee has subpoena power. So I'm hoping, that testimony is scheduled for tomorrow. Hopefully a subpoena is issued today. It's now Monday morning, and I hope that is resolved so that he can show up and be held to account and answer for these terrible problems that were created. Again, this created so much inconvenience and, life-threatening risks. But it's a dual standard of justice, as we've seen nonstop.
Carter, real quick, one last question. We got to run. What do you think should be released, or what do you think is sort of the biggest smoking gun that Americans need to know about?
Americans need to know the full story. There is so much more. Again, these elements which keep dripping out are things that I've long known, and as I talk about in my book. Unfortunately, we do not have a functioning justice system left yet. And so until people are held accountable and until we get the full story, including testimony such as the one for tomorrow.
All right, Carter, we got to leave it right there. Thank you, Carter Page, for joining us. We are going to be right back.
Wake up every morning with just the news. All the news and none of the noise.
And welcome back. I am Carrie Sheffield, and so glad that you are here on Just the News AM. We're going to close the show to let you know that October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is incredibly important. We've seen an uptick because of the coronavirus. People are, in many cases, being forced to shelter in place with their abusers. We've got a phone number here for you if you are suffering from domestic violence. We want to let you know that you are not alone. And this phone number is if it's for you or anyone else who you might be suspicious that they're in an abusive situation. This phone line can help connect you to local resources and a safety plan through a number of scenarios and situations that you might find yourself in. And President Trump and the First Lady and the White House have all made a statement about this to acknowledge, if we can put that up on screen. He made a proclamation on National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. He said that all Americans deserve a life free from the threat of physical and psychological harm. Tragically, far too many Americans are deprived of this right by perpetrators of domestic violence. During National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we offer our support to the victims and survivors of this unacceptable atrocity and reaffirm our commitment to bringing justice to their abusers and offering hope to those who currently reside in volatile and unsafe living conditions. Domestic violence is an evil that threatens the social fabric of our nation. It is a widespread attack on the most sacred and intimate of institutions, the American family. Domestic violence tears families apart with devastating consequences that can last for generations. Tragically, more than 10 million Americans suffer at the hands of loved ones each year. We want to let you know you are not alone. Please get help. We are here for you.